Right, so a little bit of a change in focus now for this session. And so we're going to turn our attention to auditor reporting. Obviously, that's the key deliverable of the audit. That is what users see. That's what tells them what the auditor did and what the auditor found. And you're all aware that a few years back, the IAASB completed its auditor reporting project, and we issued what's termed the new and revised auditor reporting standards. And again, Jasper has put up the questions that we need to look at. So if I can maybe just summarize to get us going, we've started our post-implementation review. So we are very much interested to as the IAASB, to ask ourselves the question, have we achieved the objective we intended to achieve with the new and revised auditor reporting standards, and obviously the auditor reports that are issued based on those standards? And that is really, have we succeeded in enhancing the communicative value of the auditor's report in terms of being more informative and more transparent about the audit that has been performed in such a manner that it is useful to the reader of the auditor's report, in terms of, for example, has it enhanced the confidence in the audit and in turn enhanced the confidence in the audited financial statements? So generally regarding the usefulness of the auditor's report, but then also we are very interested to hear about two specific aspects, and that is, are users finding the key audit matters useful, and is the reporting of key audit matters meeting expectations? And then around going concern, has it helped that we clearly explain the responsibilities of management and the auditor, and then have that separate section, material uncertainty related to going concern, if there is such an uncertainty? And then probably an open question, is there anything else that we should put into the auditor's report that will make it even more informative about the audit that has been performed in terms of meeting users' expectations? So that's quite a mouthful, but that's sort of the context for the discussion the next half an hour. So we open. So let's start with the straightforward question. Do you think the changes to the auditor's report has been helpful and useful to users?
My name is Nimura, and I am URA.
Okay.
From Japan. And my past experience is working for Ernst & Young for 30 years.
Okay.
And serving a certain major company's audit committee chair for 6 years.
Okay, and can you maybe just repeat your comment that you made around the auditor's report?
No.
Oh, you
I just wanted to say I need to leave.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Anyone else?
Sure. Yeah, Willie, I'll comment. Although as PwC and other auditors are the authors of these reports, I feel perhaps I'm not the best one to answer this question, or at least the first question. But if I could say, I do know that we have intended users of financial statement that want more insight and clarity into the risks an entity faces, as well as we heard in the first breakout session, more insight into what auditors are doing. And I would say the enhanced auditor reporting that we have now certainly two things. One, it certainly moves in that direction. And secondly, I will say from my own observations, the audit profession has done a nice job of listening to the intended users in the context of their market and in the context of their regulatory and legal environment. So not one size fits all in terms of what gets included in the enhanced auditor reporting. So as an example, there are reports that we've all seen where items that are considered voluntary are included in the reporting, and I would say the market is having input into what gets included in that enhanced reporting, and I think that's helpful. As I said, we have to keep that in context depending on particularly the legal environments of various countries. But nevertheless, I think it's a move in the right direction to have the market sort of saying what do the intended users expect to see in that reporting.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that perspective. And I guess the question we almost need to ask, and I mean, we've got a number of representatives from user groups and those charged of governance on this call as well, is has it made a difference? Are you looking at what the auditor did differently? Do you have a better appreciation for how the auditor arrived at the auditor's opinion? That type of perspective, has it really made a difference? Are users looking at the auditor's report more than they used to? That type of thing. And I see you want to come in.
Yes, indeed, Willie. The part of the new audit report that we find exceptionally valuable is the key audit matters. Okay. They're not entirely, they're usually quite briefly phrased, but they do point us in a direction, and they do give us leverage to be able to have the communication, or a better communication, with those charged with governance. We have, if you see it in the auditor's report, it's very rare that an audit committee chairman can not meet with you if you say you want to discuss those particular issues. So it's more the leverage than the manner in which it's expressed, but they certainly point you in the right direction, and it gives you that opportunity for better engagement.
Okay. All right. And that was certainly one of the aims, is to sort of open up the communication channels, so to speak.
Yeah.
And from a perspective of enhancing confidence in the audit that was performed?
Yes, I think it does. Well, yes and yes and no. Really, the increased confidence comes after you've met the audit committee or the board to have a discussion about those key audit matters. Usually, they're quite they're usually phrased. Many countries go for the phraseology of the key audit matter and then what the auditor did about the key audit matter. But what it does is it gives us that capacity to have the discussion, to build the trust with the firm itself.
Okay. And interesting, and you said now, remember, in terms of the standards, the auditor discloses why a matter was considered a key audit matter and how it was addressed in the audit. And then there's the optionality of also disclosing what the outcomes of the auditor's procedures were, but that's not mandated standards. No. So, but I do know that a lot of auditors actually choose to provide that perspective as well. Is that sort of useful additional information that investors and users would want to see?
Yes, it is. It is useful, most useful.
Right, Mario.
I was just going to say I agree with the comments that have been made, especially what Anne was saying there. So I think it has made a real difference. One of the things that came out in our investor roundtables that I was surprised by is the amount of store that investors place in the logo of the audit firm. So if it's an audit firm they feel confident about, a few of them told us, and these are large institutional investors, they said, well, if it's a KPMG or, one of the big four, we tend to have quite a store of faith in the audit report. We often don't read the audit report apart from the kind of CAMs because some of the wording is incredibly difficult to understand. And in the area of non-financial reporting, they told us that they really, really struggled with the wording of those assurance reports, which I know are outside of scope, but I think it's kind of relevant at the end of the day.
Of course. All right. So apart from the key audit matters, people find the auditor's report from your research. Users find the auditor's report very difficult to understand and interpret.
Yeah.
Okay, Jay, I think you've sorted out the problems. So
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
So two comments for me. And remember, again, these are my personal views. You know, they're not reflective of either IPR or the PCAOB in particular. You know, I do agree. I mean, the earlier comments about the ability to use CAMs to communicate better with audit committees, there's increasing academic research taking place in the U.S. It suggests, and also from the comment letters that the PCAOB has received, the public comment letters on its post-implementation review, it indicates that when there's a CAM, of course, it's discussed with the audit committee. Now, that may sound obvious, but in truth, we don't really know what is discussed with the audit committee, right? Because it's not a very transparent process. But here's what we know. If it's a CAM, it was discussed. So that's the first thing, right? So you know the audit committee considered it. And while I think it's kind of interesting that most of the CAMs are taxes and goodwill and things like that, there's also a small number of CAMs that involve the current COVID-19 crisis, that involve climate change. You know, in other words, there are some unique CAMs out there. Unique meaning there's a smaller number. I don't really mean necessarily they're unique, but there's a smaller number. And what you now know is they've been discussed with the audit committee. So let's say, for example, for climate change, you know that topic now has been addressed with the audit committee, which again, maybe you assume it has been, but now you know. So I think that's really important for investors. So these collateral benefits, I think, are really important. The other thing I would say, we've been talking a lot about the knowledge gap. CAMs are an opportunity, it seems to me, for firms to truly demonstrate what they do in an audit in a way that really demonstrates their expertise, right? And they have incredible expertise. I read a lot of CAMs that'll say things like we tested controls or we examined assumptions, but they don't really provide insight into how the firms did that, right? They don't really, you know, I think firms don't always take the opportunity both to educate, but also frankly to, I don't know if brag is the right word, but to sort of give people an idea of frankly how hard it is and the steps that they take to provide assurance. So for me personally, I think I would like to see more of that kind of information in the CAMs.
Okay. Yeah, almost using the CAMs as a differentiator and saying, you know what, I'm also going to use this to really tell people how I approached the audit, how we did what we did in terms of arriving at the opinion. And I think through giving that, like you say, some of these things are difficult, and that may also enhance the trust. If somebody reads a report and says, okay, so this is really all the different angles to this, this is how the auditor looked at this, that can also actually enhance the trust in the quality of the audit that has been conducted.
Yeah, they may look at something and say, wow, that really is hard. That really is uncertain. And wow, they really took some, you know, serious steps to try to address that, even if you can't eliminate how difficult and uncertain it is.
Yes, yes. So again, maybe from a user perspective, so when you read an auditor's report, and especially as Mario has indicated, investors will tend to focus on the key audit matters. Is it the question that the key audit matters confirm the areas that you as the investor already sort of suspected could be the main areas, and therefore you're saying, oh, okay, well, that gives me a lot of comfort because the auditor looked at what I also thought would have been the big items? Or is it also that sometimes something unexpected is brought to your attention? I see Annie's in deep thought.
In a way, it's a bit of both, I think. The key audit matters, they do point you in a direction, and you might already have had a suspicion. But remember, we're talking just the key audit matters of on the financials, on the audit of the financial statements. So much these days is that we need to, and this is what I meant by it opens the conversation. It allows us in the door with the audit committee. But the other side of it is we need to ask then all our questions, and many of our questions now are related to the ES&G activities rather than what's in more in the non-financial information, because so much risk is arising in those areas. And the key audit matters may be the highlight, they may not be, but they certainly provide us the opportunity.
Okay. Well, I think that in itself is very telling, because part of our post-implementation review is we've asked in our survey, we've asked the different groups do you think we should expand, for example, the notion of a key audit matter also to other assurance engagements? And I think, Anne, what you've now suggested with the increased focus on ESG and non-financial information, that might be a realistic alternative. If we focus a little bit, maybe touching back to our previous conversation, Mario, I'll come back to you just now. We can also maybe think a little bit about going concern. Our going concern is communicated in the auditor's report. Remember, in terms of the standards, we explain what the auditor's responsibility is, what management's responsibility is, and then if there's a material uncertainty, we've got that separate section in the auditor's report. Has that been useful? Do we need more? But maybe before we get to that, Mario, I know you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Willie, and it kind of segues into the next question that you're asking. I think just building on what Anne was saying, I mean, financial statements are in many respects just confirmatory because the market and investors are watching and listening to, you know, what companies are doing on a daily basis. And, you know, with social media, with everything else, there's information coming out almost kind of minute by minute. So I think, you know, the real issue is if it is a surprise, I think this goes to the going concern issue. I think it's it means the company hasn't really been managing or hasn't been transparent to the market, because otherwise the key audit matters shouldn't be complete surprises. These should just be confirming what I think, you know, everybody already knows.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting perspective, because you're almost saying, well, if it is a surprise, that in itself tells a story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else, maybe specifically on the going concern aspect? I'm thinking back to something that Mario said earlier and said, you know, people will read the CAMs. They might not read a lot of the other stuff that's in the auditor's report because they find it very difficult to understand, which then causes me to think about, you know, in our auditor reporting project, we've gone to great lengths to sort of say, well, let's explain what our responsibility is. Let's explain what management's responsibility is. Do I get a sense that that might actually be lost because people just see it disappear in the bigger auditor's report? I see Mario nodding. Ralph, in your engagements with audit clients?
Well, I think that this is just my personal experience, not speaking for others, but my personal experience is that the audit committees and management do understand the distinctions and the responsibilities and roles of each party. I think that what Mario is describing is something very different and comes back to probably again to the expectation gap and one of the causes. And that is the understanding of the words, as Mario put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Willie, just to come in on that, it constantly surprises me that in the UK, and I'm sure it's true in most jurisdictions, the directors of the company have to sign off the accounts and sign off the MD&A or narrative part of the report. And yet everybody runs, if anything goes wrong, everyone runs to the auditor because, you know, the auditor should have been the kind of policeman that caught them out. But, you know, essentially this is a governance matter in my view, and it really comes back to have the directors actually done their jobs properly. And yes, they get advice from the auditors, but ultimately they carry the responsibility for the accounts. And I think that gets lost in the wash somehow in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah. Now, again, the notion that it's all role players in the ecosystem. So have you have any of you got experience with this new section, material uncertainty related to going concern, which we tried to elevate when we did the revised reporting standards? Is it something that investors look out for? Almost like you say, they look out for the key audit matters. Is this a specific section they alert to?
Well, Willie, I'm not commenting because I don't think it's a question for me to answer. Yeah. But I would say, you know, perhaps perhaps there's a question that should be asked of the intended users. Again, going back to that whole ecosystem, yes. and I think that's part of the post-implementation review, as I understand it, with the survey. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then if you can share your wish list, what else do you think will be useful to put in an auditor's report? You know, when we went through the revised and the new and revised auditor reporting standards, we were also very conscious about, you know, you can put more and more in the report. However, you get to a point where there needs to be a balance between what you say and when is it enough and when does it become too much, and also not detracting from the fact that the auditor is still expressing an opinion on the financial statements as a whole. But I mean, even with all of that, is there any items that you've become aware of that users might be asking for more information about certain aspects? I know that in the UK, it's sort of become part of auditor reporting to disclose your materiality figure. It's not in our international standards at the moment. Anything like that?
Well, again, I can't speak to what investors are thinking, but what I can tell you is that we've done enough of our own outreach to understand, as I said earlier, that there are users of financial statements, and particularly investors and other advocacy groups that are looking for more clarity into the risks that entities face. I think the question is not about, in my opinion, not about the auditor's report. The question is, how can we identify those areas where those additional insights would be useful to users? And I don't think we should limit it to financial statements, to Anne's point. Where can we identify what those additional insights about risk are? What are the areas where those are needed? And then I think we need a framework to go outside of the audit to address those. And a framework doesn't, again, we don't originate information. It's management's job to identify those risks, and with of course oversight from governance. And so then the question would be, how does one put together something that's useful to those users to understand management's insights and to understand governance views on those, perhaps, and ultimately where there's risk that's not addressed, how are they being addressed? And the how they're being addressed could be through, for example, various controls for detection, prevention, etc. And those types of things could be subject to assurance. But bringing more into the audit report, we already heard from Mario that his outreach suggests that people don't understand the words. And so I think creating that clarity would help. The difference between an audit and other risks that can be addressed by management and governments, and then assured by other parties, maybe not even our profession in all cases.
Yeah. And I know, Anne, that you raised the point in the previous session around, you know, if companies get into this good habit of sharing more information about their risks and opportunities, and then they take the investor on the journey.
Well, I think it's about, and I agree with what Ralph has just said, and that's why I was a little silent on this. For us, we make our money out of the next steps and the next steps and the next steps, what's coming, not what's been.
Yes.
And this is an audit report on the financial statements. Now, the extent to which it points to where those next steps, next value creation is coming from is where it's important to us. And that's why in the last session, I made the point about generally risk reporting is not strong. For example, big companies will tell you a great deal about what they're doing on to manage climate change and climate risk, but they don't tell you anything much about how they're going to get there and how they're going to transition there. And it's in that step is where they're going to lose an awful lot of money. So you can see how the risk reporting is generally from companies not good. But I'll give you an example of where I mean, if they tell you and keep telling you information, BHP have a very good risk report, and they tell you what the risks are that are rising. Then they had that dam in the Samarco situation, that dam in Brazil that broke. They did not wear as much of the fallout of that, sure they didn't have to, as Vale. But there was more trust built in BHP because BHP would tell us when they were having issues arising. And I think it's not really in the auditor's report where this is going to go, but I think it might be in assurance.
Yeah, and that supports Ralph's.
Yeah.
You know, we probably at a stage where we need to make this distinction and say, right, expressing an opinion on the financial statements is one thing, but users evolve, their needs have changed. There's other things they're interested in, and we, instead of trying to push all these things together, rather recognize them and the role each have to play, and then see how we can again make that strong, both from a management and governance point of view, and then maybe also from an assurance point of view.
You see also the picture about going concern. For me, going concern, if you're, as pension plans do, they invest for the longer term. Going concern, I'll pick something, something won't be on my list unless, in fact, it's going to be in business for a year or so. So going concern is not something I really will focus on. I'll look at longer term sustainability issues.
Yes.
Which is different.
Okay. So that was very interesting. I must say that the conversation actually took a whole different direction, and because I thought we were going to talk about the auditor's report, and what you're saying is it's fine, the auditor's report serves its purpose, but there's other things that are starting to emerge that's becoming very important from an entity perspective, from a user perspective, and I think that is very important information for us as the IAASB to know as well. Roger, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Willie, and I'm aware that we might get kicked out back into the room at any particular stage, but I was interested in Anne's comment on risk reporting, and that's where she sees a lot of value. It's not something that's usually assured, or at least explicitly assured, although the auditor does a lot of work on it. So, you know, the Fiona response, which was all the new 315. Is that an area where, you know, the people in like Anne would like to see us do a little bit more? We've asked for more reporting, but would you like to see some sort of confidence around that? Would you like to see some assurance about that, Anne? I suppose I'm directing my question towards Anne and the investor group out there, Willie.
I don't think what we look at is we want to hear that the information's not pie in the sky, and usually we can pick that up from reading the annual report. But when you have lots and lots of annual reports you've got to go to throughout a year, you know, you could end up like a CalPERS, and you have thousands of companies you're invested in, and reading the annual reports before you go to the AGM is a quick flick, pretty much. I actually think you hone in on the issues that you want to look for, and you will have on your agenda definitely the forward risks, and so you'll read that, and they are very various. But I think you could consider assurance on a company risk report, where the information comes from, the basis of the risk assessments, and so on. The materiality is of risk is something we really do focus on when those companies provide their materiality and changes in materiality. In the current COVID situation, you will see some companies have provided their materiality of risks as it was at January 1, and then those that are really useful are now telling us these are their materiality of risks post-COVID or during COVID. And it tells us they're switched on, their mind is switched on, they're shifting to the issues that we can see. It's not as if we operate outside of, investors operate outside of business. We're in the world watching what's going on. What we're looking for is confirmation the company's switched on. And so there will be more work that can be done around risk and can be done generally about assurance on, as I say, this other non-financial information.
Roger, I see we've got two minutes before we're going to be yanked out of the room, as you said. So maybe any last thoughts? I think we've received a lot of good input that we can provide feedback on. I also do want to urge. I know that the PwC, for example, they will definitely fill out our survey, but I want to urge, Mario and Anne, if you can also use some of your influence to get users and those charged with governance to complete that survey of ours. That will be very beneficial, because we really want to see if the auditors' reporting standards have struck the mark and what else can be done to improve that. The one thing that I know we were concerned about when we wrote the auditor reporting standard, notion that it may become boilerplate after a few years, because remember, the company is still the company. 1 year to the next, few things change, but there was this concern about especially the CAMs becoming boilerplate. Is that anything you've experienced? Or do you still find value and the sort of that auditors are able to adapt it each year to the circumstances? Peter, did you get any feedback from your network on that? Because I know that's something the firms really focus on, not to make sure that the CAMs are not boilerplate. Sorry, not Peter, Ralph. Sorry. I said Peter, I was meaning Ralph. Sorry, I think you're on mute, Ralph.
Sorry, Willie. I think it goes to my earlier comment that certainly the opportunity is there, and I think what you said is correct. If we look at the reports that we're seeing, depending on the market, they're not at all boilerplate.
Okay.
But in some markets there's some more restriction perhaps on what it's said, but the flexibility is there in the framework.
Yes. Okay. Right. Well, we've got 35 seconds left, so I just want to thank the group. This will now be our last gathering as a group. So thank you very much for your contributions. I really think it was a very insightful conversation for the IAASB, and we will also put a feedback statement back where we just report on everything we've heard on these roundtables. So thank you very much for your participation.